Anonymity for people accused of sexual crimes. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is going to look at the possibility of giving anonymity to suspected criminals in this particular heinous area after concern over the identification and treatment of high-profile people wrongly accused of sexual abuse, one of whom we spoke to in the last half hour, Paul Gambaccini. And if it does happen, if it will happen, it will be a matter of great contention, and that's why we're discussing it this morning. Chris Daw is a criminal defence lawyer. Good morning, Chris.
Morning, Nicky.
Hi there. We've got some interesting texts. I'll just do some text first. My heart goes out to Paul Gambaccini. My father went through the same thing and through a trial with zero evidence and was found not guilty in less than half an hour by the jury. As soon as he was accused, it was in the local paper. Family also affected. I was pregnant at the time with my first child, and this was hanging over us for many months. I went to the trial with a newborn baby. My child has learning difficulties and often wonder if the stress I suffered during pregnancy contributed to this. At the time, the police were advertising for people to come forward if they had been abused by anyone. And that's from Anonymous. Another one, if Paul thinks being accused of it is difficult, think how the victim feels. And quite a lot of contention coming in on the text about false accusations in rape cases. Many people saying it's very, very low. Others agreeing with Paul that it's significant. And another one here, can I point out that some victims of historic sexual abuse who disclose that they were abused aren't either making it up or, as Paul says, embellishing. Sometimes, as in my case, it was a hidden memory, something as a young man I couldn't handle, so I pushed it to the back of my mind, which is so destructive. Regards, Anonymous in Gloucestershire. Chris, the arguments are pretty finely balanced here. Many people would say, how do we crack it to protect people going through a hell, but to get other victims, other survivors coming forward and getting justice?
Well, Nicky, you're absolutely right. This is an incredibly difficult, nuanced and highly emotive subject. I've been involved in these cases of allegations of sexual abuse for almost 30 years as a defence lawyer, and every single one of my clients, whether eventually convicted or acquitted, has been through a journey to hell and back, as of course has every single victim of sexual violence or sexual abuse of any kind. So I think what we have to do is perhaps try and step back from the emotion and look at the practicality of why the system is as it is and how perhaps it could be changed. The reason it is as it is now, so that those who make accusations of sexual assault, i.e. complainants, and in some cases victims of sexual violence, are granted lifelong anonymity, and that's for a very good reason, because of course if they weren't granted anonymity and if their names were published in association with cases of this kind, you can imagine the effect that would have on the willingness of people to come forward and make complaints. We already have a huge issue in this country with a lack of action when it comes to complaints of rape and sexual assault. Tiny percentage of such cases ever reach the courts at all, and many victims are put off from coming forward already, even with anonymity. So I think anonymity for alleged victims, complainants as we call them in the system, is absolutely essential to ensure that victims can be brave enough to come forward and to confront the crimes that have been committed against them. When it comes to those who are accused of those crimes, and as I say, they're my clients, I represent people in such a situation, I think the overall balance comes down in the opposite direction for this reason. Firstly, we have a system of open justice. We have a system whereby the public are entitled to know what goes on in the criminal justice system, and that's the only way we, the public, can make a judgment as to whether the system is doing its job properly. Secondly, there isn't that same reasoning around people not coming forward, because of defendants, of course, have no choice. They are arrested, they are charged, and they are prosecuted. So there's no sort of question of individual choice or impact on that individual defendant. I think the third reason is really, really important, and we've seen it in case after case, and I know you've been very public, Nicky, in making comments about this particular area yourself. When a person, whether they're high profile or not, is accused of committing a sexual offence or a sexual assault, whether against children or against anyone else, one often finds in the system that empowers other victims of that same person to come forward and say, actually, that happened to me too. And many people are reluctant to come forward and make complaints because they believe they're on their own, that no one will believe them. And it's only when there is publicity, Jimmy Savile was a good example, of course, but when there's publicity around particular high-profile people who have been involved in this kind of misconduct, that many others say, well, actually, I'm going to be brave come forward too. And I think it's really important that we don't have a complete anonymity in every sexual case. We'd end up, if you follow through, both the defendant and the complainant will be anonymous. Nobody would know who was involved in the case, and I think that would be very dangerous for open justice, and it would be very dangerous for encouraging victims to come forward.
Mm-hmm. Maybe in that specific area of Paul and others, there was post-Savile, there was a kind of, some people say there was a bit of a witch hunt mentality going on at the time. We got Joe, we got John. Good to know you're there, Chris. Interesting thoughts, as ever. Joe, not real name, in Devon. What happened to you, sir?
Good morning, Nicky. I was listening on the radio a little while ago to Paul Gambaccini, and especially it resonated with me, the panic attacks he had, etc., etc. I can relate to everything that he said. The only difference is that I'm not a celebrity, but that happened to me as well, and I was just basically treated as guilty and had to prove my innocence instead of the wrong way around. It was the tail wagging the dog, and it's never left me. I mean, it's 2022. This happened many years ago, but I died many years ago. It's I've had tremendous support from my family, and they've helped me to get through. I've had to have CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR treatment. I had PTSD, which is still with me. I'm just not the person that I was, but it was I have no case to answer after about 3 or 4 months of going through hell, wanting to kill myself. Just wretched, and there's no consequences on the person who, on the accuser, and not that we know of, and I'm damn sure there's no consequences on the accuser. It's never been the same since. Life is not a good quality of life. I can remember Lord McAlpine actually saying when he was accused that it gets and acquitted, whatever word you want to use, but it gets into your bones and your soul. And I've been lucky to have an establishment that have helped me to come through this. And
how long ago was it he was falsely accused, Lord McAlpine? Of course. How long ago was it? This, Joe?
Probably about 14 or 15 years ago.
Still with you. Were you named in the press?
No, I wasn't named in the press, thankfully. Not named in the press, but was just hell. I'm trying to contain myself now because it sets off as well. You know, Paul Gambaccini, Cliff Richard, searching for justice. It sets off a real injustice button in your soul, and I have. That needs fighting for, I fight for now, and it's been detrimental to my health. My family said you've got to stop crusading and being vigilante and all these types of things in your thoughts, you know, trying to put the worlds to right when there's no hope in hell. You can put everything right in the world, but it's just self. I wish I knew how to switch it off. I don't even know how to switch it off. It's a terrible, terrible thing.
Mm-hmm. Let's hear from John as well. Terrible, terrible thing. And the PTSD you're still suffering 14, 15 years ago is still a kind of hell. John in Cambridgeshire. Good morning, John. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, such a terrible story from that fella. But I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle, and which would probably alleviate a lot of the problems of what has gone on in the past. If it is proved that somebody was privy to information of a serious crime, then they should be charged with aiding and abetting a felon, and they should receive exactly the same sentence as the perpetrator. And I'm talking about the upper echelons in the clergy and the BBC and what have you. They knew things were going on and nothing was done. To me, that's a criminal offence, and it should be charged as such. Why isn't it?
There's a good point there, Chris, isn't there? A couple of good points. Joe makes an excellent point, which I want to come to, and also John's point there about those who were complicit or those who knew, and that resonates with me, thinking back to schools. So what is the law on that, Chris?
Well, generally speaking, when it comes to the criminal law, you can only be prosecuted for things that you do rather than things that you don't do. So in other words, sort of keeping your mouth shut and not reporting something that you're aware of, it may be a crime in certain circumstances, but generally speaking, there has to be complicity in the crime itself. So encouraging or enabling the crime to take place rather than simply being aware of it or being aware of rumours and doing nothing about it. Now, that, of course, may well be...
change the law.
Well, you may be right. I'm not. There may be an argument for making those, particularly those in positions of authority and who have real power and who have the power to stop these things happening, not properly exercising that power. Whether that should be criminalised is a good point and a good conversation to be had. Of course, you can claim damages, civil damages, money damages against institutions which are negligent in the care of children or in the care of anyone under their care. But that, of course, is generally no great compensation to someone who's been the victim of serious sexual abuse.
I didn't think money would be a lot of recompense for the fellow that was on just before me.
No, I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you that the system is very, very broken. I think one of the issues here, though, Nicky and everybody, is that many of these cases were not... The law wasn't necessarily the problem. The problem was that those who were involved in the cases didn't do their job properly. So in the case of the Westminster scandal, as has emerged, and the false accusations made against so many in that case, that was clearly a result of negligent police work, completely negligent police work.
Because there was a mindset at the time, wasn't there?
Precisely. There was a mindset which was explicitly stated of you must believe people who make these complaints, even if they are inherently incredible, even if there's no supporting evidence, and even if the background of the person making the complaint should cause serious concern. We went too far. The system went too far in that mindset. We must believe complainants at all costs. It's been rebalanced a little now, but sadly, there are so many people, like a number of your callers, and of course, like the high-profile people that you've been mentioning in the programme, there are so many people who are put wrongly and needlessly through prosecutions which collapse either before the trial or during the trial, and the person's life is ruined forever. I have to say, though, that's the case of anybody that's prosecuted for almost any crime. I mean, sexual crimes are particularly emotive subjects, but if you're prosecuted for a fraud or a burglary or a robbery that you didn't commit, then that puts your life completely on hold and puts you to hell and back. So anybody that's wrongly prosecuted is in the same position.
There's some candid text, and there's one here on that issue. A couple very much saying in different words, it's a price worth paying, unfortunately, so that we get justice and so that other victims come forward. It's just an unfortunate and painful byproduct of the system.
Well, I mean, sadly, that must be the case, because if you think about it, we have to have a criminal process. I mean, if someone is arrested for rape, we have to have a process where they are put on trial, whether there's publicity about their name or not. That is going to be a process that causes enormous damage to someone who is innocent, and the publicity aspect to it just piles on that humiliation, piles on all of those mental and psychological pressures that your callers have been mentioning. But the truth of it is, we have to have a justice system that can deal with serious sexual violence. There is a conversation about levels of publicity, but I think the more important conversation for me is about why the system is so rubbish at actually just getting these cases dealt with efficiently and quickly. Because at the moment, rape victims are waiting almost 5 years to give evidence.
It's scandalous, absolutely.
And that's an utter scandal.
Yeah.
I've represented women who have been raped and have been provably, and in the end, the court has decided, the juries have found their attacker guilty of rape, and their lives have just been utterly destroyed. But the rape itself, of course, is the biggest. But what the system does by making them wait for year after year and giving them no information just pounds the humiliation and the enormous pain.
People will say on the other side, others who are innocent who have to wait that length of time as well, although a far smaller amount, as has been established by countless organisations. Some texts here. Joe, I want to bring you back in a second, but I'm not. 4 texts I want to read. I'm not suggesting false accusations don't happen, but just because the accused is not convicted does not mean it was a false accusation. However, false accusations do ruin lives and should be punished as such. That's from John. This is this one here. There are false allegations for this sort of crime, so it's simple. The accusers already have anonymity. It's only fair that the accused should be treated the same until the verdict is reached. Another one, police definitely need to be better, but the idea that we treat people differently in law because of their charge, as people don't come forward to report a crime, is bonkers. We need to have a fair legal system for the victim and the accused, and changing that reduces the trust in the law. And another one, whether you are incorrectly accused of abuse or subjected to abuse, as I was as a child at school, you become hopefully a survivor. No amount of money compensates, but seems to be the only vehicle we have. That's from Catherine. And also there is the point about, can you have anonymity for sexual crimes and not for a murder accusation, for example, Chris?
Yeah, well, this is the problem, isn't it? Because, whilst we all know that being accused of a sexual crime carries a particular taint to your life and your reputation, in a different way, but equally horrifically, being wrongly accused of murder or robbery or stealing from your family or some other thing which is, reputationally devastating to you if you didn't do it. All of those things. I mean, every single one of my clients, and many of them are very high profile and in the public eye, every single one of them is put through a public process, splashed all over the newspapers, and until there is a verdict of a jury in the end, generally speaking, they are effectively seen by many as probably or possibly guilty. And that, as I say, it applies in every kind of crime. And I think that the truth of it is that for me, after my considered sort of verdict, if you want to call it that, after 30 years, is that open justice is absolutely crucial to a functioning criminal justice system. And the more secrecy we have, except in that very limited category of protecting victims' anonymity, I think all secrecy is generally bad for the system and bad for justice.
The Home Secretary carries this through, we ain't heard nothing yet in terms of debate. I can tell you that. Joe Wood from RASA, Rape and Sexual Abuse Support Charity. Joe, thank you. Hi, how are you doing?
Okay.
What do you think of what the Home Secretary says here, examining the possibility of giving anonymity to suspected people suspected of sex crimes, a change in direction? What do you reckon?
I think it's a very, very big backward step into the 1970s. I just think there are so many barriers to anybody who wants to report a sex crime or crime against them of any sort of sexual nature. And one of the biggest barriers is that they may have actually heard that it's happened to someone else, same person, etc. So it just puts up another barrier. It's hard enough to report. It's hard enough to get a prosecution. And this would just send everything back even further.
What do we do? Likes of Joe, we heard from Joe earlier on. In a sentence, what's your life like now, Joe?
I have my family, but I haven't had a full night's sleep since it happened. I get treatment. But it never leaves you. Never leaves you.
Never leaves you. We heard from Paul Gambaccini earlier on, who went through a living hell for a year plus. What about those people, Joe? Are they just sort of collateral damage in the necessary course of justice?
If everybody's carried out their jobs correctly, and if the detectives and the police and the CPS and everybody else, you can't imagine how difficult it is to get anyone to take rape and sexual violence seriously in the first place. So if they've actually managed to get the CPS to charge someone, then they have to go through the whole process. Why on earth would we not name them when every other crime that you can possibly think of? I mean, there's a guy yesterday in Liverpool accused of murdering a small child. We all know who he is now. Why would we not? He still hasn't gone through trial. He's still innocent until found guilty.
Well, Chris, so important. Chris,
That's not true.
Well, hang on a minute. Let me put this to Chris, because I do want to. A judge can make an individual decision, or a CPS or a procurator fiscal can make an individual decision in an individual case, can't they? So it doesn't have to be blanket, Chris.
You mean in respect of anonymity at the moment?
Yeah.
No, at the moment there's an almost absolute presumption that any adult defendant will be named. Children, the presumption is the opposite. So it requires a judge to make a decision as to whether to allow a child defendant.
So you can't at the moment say, on this occasion we're not going to name, but on that occasion we will name. It's blanket. Yeah, it's absolute.
It can happen, but the only circumstance in which it happens is if there's to be more than one trial. And so, for example, if someone's going to be tried more than than once in a series of trials. It may be that there is anonymity in the first trial to avoid prejudice of the second or the third trials, but not as a general principle, no. The anonymity is really unheard of.
Okay.
Other than
Joe, it's good to have you on towards the end of the programme. Chris Daw, so interesting. Thanks for your views and wisdom. Well, this is a runner, this one.
The voice of the UK. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.